Welcome back to Threads of Truth, where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation.
It's good to be back. And today's case is a bit of a reversal for us.
How so?
Well, so often we're trying to piece together a story from, just a few scraps of evidence.
Right, trying to find the signal in the noise.
Exactly. But today we're looking at a case that is just flooded with evidence. It's overwhelming. The problem is the official answer, the conclusion they came to, it just doesn't fit any of it.
Not even a little bit.
Yeah.
That's what's so jarring about the story of Charles C. Morgan Jr. in Tucson, Arizona, back in 1977. I mean, the sources we're looking at, they lay out a story that's so packed with contradictions, it just sets off every alarm bell you have.
It's less of a what happened here and more of a why are they telling us that happened?
Yes. And to get a sense of just how strange this is, we have to start right before he died.
Yeah.
We have to talk about the state he was in.
He was terrified. And that's putting it mildly. This wasn't just a man who was worried about something.
Right.
He was so gripped by fear, so convinced he was about to be killed that he refused to speak. He would only communicate with his own family by writing these frantic little notes.
And he took this one very specific, very physical precaution. It's really the central image of this entire mystery.
The bulletproof vest.
The bulletproof vest. He wore it constantly. He was literally armoring himself, preparing for a hit he was sure was coming.
He was expecting to be shot, probably in the chest or the back, a classic mob-style hit. And then in May of 1977, his body is found.
Out in the desert, just outside of Tucson, he'd been shot.
And this is where the story just breaks. He was still wearing the vest.
Still wearing it, but he was shot in the back of the head.
An execution-style wound, with his own gun, no less. And the official initial ruling from the authorities?
Suicide.
Suicide. A man preparing to be shot, wearing a bulletproof vest, somehow shoots himself in the back of the head.
It's a conclusion that requires you to ignore every single piece of physical evidence. It makes no sense.
And that's what we need to examine today. We're going to walk through the timeline, which is just bizarre. We'll look at his alleged ties to organized crime, a very strange kidnapping incident that happened just before he died, and of course, all the cryptic clues left at the actual crime scene.
And we have to really weigh the evidence. Does any of it at all, support the suicide ruling? Or does it all point to something else? Something more like a sophisticated staged murder?
A staged murder meant to look like a man losing his mind. That's the core of it.
Okay, let's get into it. Who was Charles Morgan, and how did a man like that get tangled up with the mafia?
Well, on the surface, in 1977, Charles Morgan looked like a pretty typical success story in Tucson, Arizona.
He was a family man, right?
A family man, a respected businessman. He was an escrow agent.
Which sounds pretty mundane.
It should be. But according to the sources, Morgan's professional life was really just a cover, an extremely effective one.
A cover for what?
For massive, and I mean massive, financial crime. He was allegedly laundering money. And the numbers are they're staggering. We're talking about over $1 billion in illegal funds.
$1 billion. In 1977 money.
Yes. If you adjust for inflation, that's something like $5 billion today. Just a mind-boggling amount of cash.
So this wasn't some small-time operation. This is high-level, serious enterprise.
Oh, absolutely. And the sources are very specific about who he was working for. This wasn't just some abstract criminal element.
It was the mafia.
Specifically, the Ned Warren and the Joe Bonanno crime families. These were the major players in that part of the country.
Can you give us some context on them? Who were Warren and Bonanno?
Sure. Ned Warren was known as the Arizona land fraud king. He ran this huge, very complex web of fraudulent real estate deals all over the Southwest. A very powerful figure. And Joe Bonanno, well, he was one of the original heads of the five families in New York. By the 70s, he had officially retired, but he still had immense influence. And his family had set up shop in Arizona, controlling financial operations, narcotics routes, basically anything coming up from the border.
So Morgan wasn't just working for the mob. He was working for the guys who basically ran the whole illegal financial system in that state.
He was their linchpin. And his job as an escrow agent was the perfect tool.
How does that work exactly? What does an escrow agent do that makes them so useful for money laundering?
An escrow agent is a neutral third party in a transaction. They hold on to funds and documents, and they only release them when all the conditions of a sale are met. It's all about trust.
A trust he was exploiting.
Massively. He would take the dirty cash from, say, drug sales or one of Ned Warren's land scams, and he'd put it into his escrow accounts. For a brief moment, it looked legitimate. It was inside a real banking structure.
So it was clean, at least on paper.
Clean enough to move. And from there, the sources say he would convert it into legal assets, specifically gold and platinum.
Gold and platinum. Why? Precious metals. Why not just buy, I don't know, a bunch of buildings?
That's a great question, and it's key to the whole operation. Back in the 70s, the regulations were much looser. If you bought real estate, it left a huge paper trail. It's stuck in one place. It's just easier for investigators to trace and seize.
But gold is different.
Gold and platinum are portable. They're valuable anywhere in the world, and they're much, much harder to trace back to a specific source. You can move millions of dollars in a briefcase. It was the perfect way to, rinse the money clean.
And Arizona in the 70s was the right place for this kind of thing.
It was the perfect storm. The escrow industry itself just wasn't heavily regulated back then. There wasn't a lot of government oversight, so huge cash transactions didn't raise the same red flags they would today. It was a system just waiting to be exploited.
So Morgan is living this double life, handling billions of dollars, and that's the knowledge that eventually puts him and his family in direct danger.
It does. And that brings us to the first major incident, the first warning shot, you could say. It happened in March of 1977.
And it is deeply, deeply unsettling.
It's the moment the danger stops being theoretical. Charles Morgan just vanishes for 3 whole days. Nobody knows where he is.
And then he comes back. And his return it's like something from a movie.
A horror movie. He stumbles into his house at 2 a.m. He's missing a shoe, and he has zip-tie cuffs still on his wrists and ankles.
Clear signs of abduction. He was taken, and he was held somewhere.
Absolutely. But that's not even the strangest part. The truly bizarre and frankly brilliant part of it was he couldn't speak.
Right. This is the silent threat.
He grabs a pen and paper and starts writing frantic notes to his wife, Ruth. He claims his throat has been painted with a hallucinogenic drug.
A very potent, very lethal one.
Yeah.
Probably a high-dose synthetic like LSD.
And the threat was that if he tried to speak, the simple movement of his throat muscles would cause him to absorb it. It would either drive him insane on the spot, or it would kill him.
I mean, think about the psychology of that. It's an incredibly sophisticated form of coercion. It doesn't just silence him for a few hours.
It silences him indefinitely. It isolates him completely. He can't call the police. He can't fully explain to his wife what's happening. He can't even go to a doctor because how would he explain it without, dying?
It's a perfect prison.
And it suggests the people who did this were extremely organized. They knew about pharmacology or at least chemical threats. This was not a simple kidnapping.
And in these notes, he tells his wife, don't call the police. He also tells her to move his car. And then he drops a bombshell, a claim that just reframes this entire story.
He writes down, they took my treasury identification.
He wasn't just a money launderer for the mob.
He was claiming that for the last 2 or 3 years, he'd been working undercover, an agent for the U.S. Treasury Department.
Okay, we have to stop there. That claim is everything. Because if it's true, he's a deep cover operative who's just been burned by the mafia.
And if it's false, it's just a desperate lie from a man in way over his head. The problem is the U.S. government has never, ever confirmed it.
Right. And that ambiguity is what fuels so much of the speculation, isn't it? Was the government denying it to protect a bigger investigation, or because it just wasn't true?
We don't know. But what we do know is that after this incident, Morgan's behavior changed dramatically. The psychological impact was obvious.
This is when he starts taking all those precautions. The bulletproof vest becomes part of his daily wardrobe.
He grows a beard, probably trying to change his appearance. He completely changes his family's routine. He starts driving his daughters to school himself instead of letting them walk.
He was afraid the hit wasn't just on him, it could extend to his family.
It establishes this baseline of genuine, verifiable terror. For about 2 months, between that kidnapping and his death, he was a man who absolutely believed he was marked for death. And he acted like it.
But all the precautions, they didn't work.
No. In May, he disappears again. And his wife, Ruth, she said she had this immediate terrible feeling.
Of course she did, after what they'd just been through.
9 days later, they find his body, 40 miles west of Tucson, out in the desert.
And what we've learned since is that in those last days, He was basically hiding out.
He'd been in a motel room, just paralyzed with fear. He knew there was a contract out on his life.
But he didn't just wait to die. The sources say he tried one last desperate gambit.
A really high-risk move. He tried to contact the hitman.
He tried to buy his way out,
He was trying to negotiate for his own life, pay off the contract.
which implies he went to meet someone.
He was lured out to that remote desert spot, probably told it was the place to deliver the payoff money. But instead of saving his life, he was executed.
Okay, let's drill down into the crime scene, because this is where the official suicide story just completely falls apart.
It really does. The contradictions just start piling up, one after another.
So he was killed by a single gunshot.
To the back of the head. An execution-style wound inflicted with his own handgun, a .357 Magnum.
So, contradiction number one, the vest. You don't put on a bulletproof vest to protect yourself and then decide to shoot yourself.
And number two, the location of the wound. It is incredibly difficult, almost physically impossible to shoot yourself in the back of the head, especially with a heavy revolver like a .357. Suicides are almost always to the temple or in the mouth.
Then there's the gun itself.
The gun is damning. The .357 Magnum lying next to his body. It had none of his fingerprints on it. None.
It was wiped clean. A suicidal person doesn't meticulously wipe their prints off the weapon.
Not at all. It suggests the killer wiped it and then placed it there to stage the scene, and it gets even more specific.
Morgan was right-handed.
He was right-handed, but the gunpowder residue they found, it was on his left hand.
That is such a critical detail. What does that suggest to you?
It strongly suggests coercion. Maybe the gun was forced into his left hand or he was made to touch it while the killer was holding it. It points directly to staging.
The staging was either really sloppy or the killers just didn't care. They assumed nobody would look too closely.
I think that's likely. They figured it was a gangland hit and the local cops would be happy to write it off as something simple.
And his car was nearby, right? A Mercury Cougar.
Yes, and the car had its own set of crews. It had been modified in this really peculiar way. You could unlock it from the outside from a spot on the fender.
Why? What was that for?
The sources connect that directly to his money laundering work. It was a covert way to access the car for drop-offs. You know, leaving cash or documents inside without needing keys, without a handoff. It was part of the tradecraft.
Which suggests the killers knew his methods. They might have even used his own car to bring him there.
It's very possible. And inside the car, there were more bizarre things.
A pair of sunglasses that didn't belong to him.
Right, suggesting someone else was there. And then the most gruesome detail of all,
His tooth.
one of his own teeth, wrapped up neatly in a handkerchief, just sitting inside the car.
What does that even mean? Torture. A warning.
It points to prior violence, maybe a final brutal interrogation before they killed him. It's this visceral little reminder of just how ruthless these people were.
So let's just recap. We have a bulletproof vest, a shot to the back of the head, a wipe gun, and powder residue on the wrong hand, and a tooth.
Yes. And despite all of that, the local sheriff's office pronounced the death a suicide.
The family must have been outraged.
Immediately, they questioned it from day one. Even the coroner, the sources say, was hesitant. He wasn't sure. But the authorities, they just seized on the fact that the gun was near the body and pushed the suicide story.
Why? It just feels like willful ignorance.
Well, it allowed them to close a very messy, very dangerous case. An investigation would have led them straight to the mafia and maybe even to federal intelligence operations. It was just easier for them to close the books. The official story failed from the very start.
And that failure is why this case has had such a long life online in forums and speculation.
Absolutely, because when the official story makes no sense, people will look for another one. And this case has all the elements to fuel that. Organized crime, possible espionage.
And a code. A cryptic code left by the victim.
This is what takes the story from a straightforward mob hit into something else entirely. Something closer to a spy thriller.
The $2 bill. Tell us about the bill. Where was it found?
It was found pinned inside his underwear. A very deliberate act. It was clearly meant to be found. And it was his final message, the one thing he couldn't say out loud.
It was a complex message, wasn't it? It had layers.
It had 3 distinct layers, yes.
Huh.
It was clearly meant for someone who knew how to decode it.
Okay, what was the first layer?
The first was a direct biblical reference. The words Ecclesiastes 12.128 were written on the bill. And very importantly, there were arrows drawn, pointing to the 1 and the 8 on the bill's serial number.
Ecclesiastes 12, that's a very somber passage.
Right.
It's all about old age and death, the golden bowl being broken. It's a very fatalistic choice.
A powerful metaphor for his own impending death. The second layer was a list of 7 names or words. They started sequentially with the letters A through G.
And what were they?
A mix. Some were Spanish surnames, but there were also words directly related to his business, like cajero, which means cashier in Spanish, and another word, graduas, which means graduates.
So was this a list of his co-conspirators? Code names? Targets?
That's the million-dollar question, and it gets even more complex with the third layer, which was on the back of the bill.
What was on the back?
2 things. First, a crude, hand-drawn map that seemed to lead towards the Mexican border, which is very significant given the Bonanno family's smuggling routes.
Okay.
And next to the map, the names of the first 7 signers of the Declaration of Independence were written down and numbered 1 through 7.
Wow. Okay, so what's the leading theory here? A lot of people believe this was a book cipher.
That's the most compelling interpretation, yes. A book cipher is a classic intelligence tool. You agree on a text beforehand, the book, and that becomes your key for encryption.
So the Bible, Ecclesiastes 12, that was the book.
That's the theory. The reference to verses 1 through 8, the arrows pointing to the 1 and 8 in the serial number, it's all coordinates. For a handler, the instructions might be to take a standard Bible, go to that passage, and maybe use the serial number to count words or letters to spell out a message.
It's basically a dead man's switch.
Exactly. If Morgan was a treasury agent, this was his final report. It was meant for his handler to lay out the whole operation, maybe point to where the money was or name the people who killed him. The complexity of it feels like an intelligence communication, not the ramblings of a suicidal man.
What's the other interpretation?
That it was more direct, not a cipher, but a list. The names were his killers. The map led to their safe house near the border.
And the fact that the mysterious caller, Green Eyes, referenced the same Bible verse. That seems to confirm that this code was understood by people involved in his death.
It does. It validates the whole thing. It means the code was real, the contract was real, and someone else knew about it.
So when you connect this all back to the mafia, the motive for a staged murder is it's crystal clear.
It is. Laundering that much money for the Warren and Bonanno families. Charles Morgan knew everything. He knew where all the bodies were buried, literally and financially. He could have brought down their entire empire.
And he had started talking?
Critically, yes. Just before he was killed, he testified in a secret state investigation. It was about a place called the Banco International de Arizona.
What was that?
It was a hub for Ned Warren's fraudulent land deals and money laundering. So Morgan was cooperating. And if the mob found out, which seems almost certain given the March kidnapping, then he was a dead man. They had every reason in the world to silence him.
And staging it as a suicide would be the perfect way to do it.
It's brilliant in a dark way. It closes the case fast. It keeps the FBI from launching a huge investigation into their business. And it sends a message to anyone else who might think about cooperating. This is what happens. You don't just get killed, you get erased. Your death becomes a story about you going crazy.
The cover-up didn't even stop after he died, though. There are these other strange details, like the missing letter.
Right. Morgan told his father that he'd written a letter that would explain everything, the full story. That letter has never been found.
And the family suspects it was taken.
The story is that men claiming to be FBI agents came to the house and ransacked it after his death. The suspicion is they took the letter.
So that raises another possibility. Maybe the cover-up wasn't just the mafia. Maybe the government was involved too, trying to bury a failed undercover operation.
Whether it was real FBI agents or just mob guys pretending to be feds, the fact that the one piece of evidence that could solve the whole thing disappeared, it's just another layer of suppression.
And then there's the phone call, the call from Green Eyes.
This is one of the most chilling parts of the story. Ruth Morgan gets a call from a mysterious woman before her husband's body has even been officially identified.
So the caller had inside knowledge.
She did. She called herself Green Eyes, and she said she'd met Chuck at the motel he was hiding in. She confirmed he was trying to buy his way out of the contract.
And she knew about the Bible verse.
She referenced Ecclesiastes 12.128, the exact same verse from the $2 bill.
That's irrefutable. That's a direct link. It proves she was part of it or a witness to it, It proves the code was real.
It validates everything Morgan feared. It confirms the contract, the betrayal, all of it.
And this story, this cloud of suspicion, it didn't just fade away. It actually led to another death years later.
Yes, we have to talk about the journalist, Don Devereaux.
He was the one who kept digging into this case, right? Who wouldn't let it go.
He kept reporting on it, trying to link Morgan's death to the bigger organized crime networks in Arizona. Then, 13 years later, in 1990, a man named Doug Johnston was murdered.
And the connection.
It was tragic. Johnston drove a similar car to Don Devereaux, and he lived at an address that was almost identical. The theory has always been that it was mistaken hit.
They were trying to kill the journalist who was investigating the Charles Morgan case.
That's the belief. And if it's true, it shows that whoever killed Morgan was still active and still willing to kill to protect that secret more than a decade later.
It's why the suicide ruling is just so impossible to accept. You have to believe in this incredibly bizarre, contradictory series of events.
You'd have to believe that a man wearing a vest for protection decided to kill himself, wiped his fingerprints off the gun, shot himself in the back of the head, and managed to do it with his non-dominant hand. It defies all logic.
So now we have to really analyze this. Let's try to make the argument for suicide, just to be thorough. Is there any scenario where that makes sense?
It's a very, very thin argument, but we have to entertain it. The only way it works is if you believe the psychological pressure was so immense that he had a complete break from reality.
I mean, he was under unimaginable stress. The fear of that drug, the constant threat of a hit, that could certainly shatter someone.
Absolutely. So the argument would be that in a final, paranoid, desperate state, fearing he was about to be captured and tortured, he chose to end his own life in this bizarre, theatrical way. Maybe the vest was symbolic by that point, a useless shield against his own despair.
But the physical evidence just screams homicide. We have to go back to the staging of the scene.
Let's do that. Because it's not just that the evidence contradicts suicide, it's that it points so clearly to a staged death.
The shot to the back of the head, the wiped gun. That's not madness. That's a calculated external act.
And the residue on the left hand is so specific, it feels like the gun was forced into his hand. Maybe his hand was wrapped around it when the killer fired, or maybe they just made him touch it to leave that trace amount of residue.
Why would they leave the vest on him, though? If you're staging a suicide, wouldn't you take that off? It's the most obvious contradiction.
It suggests they were in a hurry, or that they were sloppy. These were likely mobsters, not forensic masterminds. Their goal was to eliminate the target and create just enough of a plausible suicide scene for the local cops to bite.
And they assumed, probably correctly, that the local sheriff would be looking for the easiest answer.
I think so. Which brings us to the motive for the ruling itself. Why push suicide so hard when it was so obviously flawed?
It just saved everyone a lot of trouble.
A huge amount of trouble. The Tucson Police Department in 1977 wasn't equipped to take on the Bonanno crime family. Declaring it a suicide meant no turf wars with the FBI, no massive federal investigation, and it kept a lid on the dirty laundry of the state's financial system.
So the official story wasn't about finding the truth. It was about damage control, institutional self-preservation.
Exactly. The homicide theory just fits everything perfectly. He was lured to that spot, trying to pay off his own hitman. He was executed, and the scene was quickly but imperfectly staged. The evidence we have are just the mistakes they made.
Let's go back to the kidnapping, the silent threat. If we accept that that really happened, and the zip time marks say something violent happened, it changes how we see everything that follows.
It does. It means his terror was rational. The notes, the vest, the desperate attempt to buy his life back. That's not paranoia. That's the behavior of a man who has been given a very credible death threat by very dangerous people.
And if his fear was rational, then the suicide ruling becomes completely irrational.
It becomes impossible. People who are taking every step imaginable to stay alive don't just suddenly commit suicide in the most complicated way possible.
Which brings us back to that central question that we still can't answer. What did Charles Morgan know? What was the specific information that was so dangerous it had to be suppressed with this level of extreme prejudice?
I think it was more than just the money laundering. It was his secret testimony, his cooperation in that state investigation into the Banco International. He knew the whole system. The money, the fraud, the names, the institutions.
And if he really was a Treasury agent,
then his death represents a catastrophic intelligence failure. One the government would have every reason to want swept under the rug as a simple local suicide. Morgan knew too much about where crime, power, and government all intersected.
So when you put it all together,
Right.
the complex code, the green eyes call, the car, the execution-style wound, the official story that makes no sense, and even the mistaken hit on the journalist years later.
The picture of a staged execution becomes unavoidable. And that's why this mystery endures. The official answer is so profoundly unsatisfying, so contrary to the facts, that people are left with no choice but to search for the real story in the codes and contradictions he left behind.
The case of Charles Morgan Jr. in Tucson serves as a stark reminder of how fragile truth becomes when official answers clash sharply with concrete physical evidence and the extreme circumstances experienced by the victim leading up to their death. He took every possible step to protect himself, yet the narrative was manipulated to erase the violence done to him.
Morgan's final desperate actions, the constant wearing of the vest, the silent written warnings, the code pinned to his body, serve as a lasting testament to the monumental level of threat he faced. The persistence of this mystery is a reflection that sometimes the evidence of foul play is so abundant that its outright rejection by authorities becomes the biggest, most damning mystery of all.
We hope this exploration of the Charles Morgan sources gives you plenty to reflect on, particularly about the incentives driving official narratives in the face of complex crime.
Thank you for joining us as we examine the threads of this unsettling mystery.
Next time, we'll shift our focus to a more recent case that shook a quiet town to its core. The disappearance of a beloved teacher, Tara Grinstead. A case where the question of where she went led to years of agonizing uncertainty and silence.
Join us then as we explore the threads of that enduring mystery.